Hi, welcome. We are working on Form 5B for your HACCP program. Many of you completed the Hazard Analysis and Audit Systems course over the reading week. Congratulations. And the skills that you bring from that course, I highly recommend using them as you design your HACCP program. But I'm going to teach it from my perspective. Again, you would have been taught in that course that you go and do site-specific observation and identify hazards relevant to the environment that you're working in. So for example, if I am making my banana muffins and I've got my process flow here up on Form 3, I may have site-specific issues with the different steps that I'm doing. So for example, if I'm weighing my dry ingredients, depending on the environment that I'm weighing my dry ingredients in, I may have potential for cross-contamination with allergens, or maybe my wet ingredients are bulked out long in advance of their preparation. And if I'm handling things such as dairy products or egg products, I may be needing to add refrigeration steps. Think of many of the commercial bakeries where products are made early morning and they may be pre-weighing things and need to add additional storage steps relative to the risk of the ingredients that are being worked on here. So in Form 5B, you are taking the contents of Form 3 and transferring it over to your Form 5. Now, there we go, Form 5B. List all of your processing steps as shown on Form 3. Now, I have taken some liberties here because I want to make sure that we have a variety of different steps that are relevant and are going to help take us across this entire decision-making tree. Now, again, use your common sense. Use the approach that Victor taught you. Think of what your hazard is. Think of what the risk profile is. Note there is a risk rating qualitative matrix here. Again, I don't expect to take a whole scientific approach. Use a common sense approach. Then identify, is the hazard being controlled by the GMP or is it being controlled by the process? Think about it common sense. Can I do something in the decisions that I make in my environment to control this hazard, or is the step itself the control mechanism? Think about it that way, and this is going to help identify what is a CCP versus what is a GMP, because as was discussed, you want to avoid CCPs as much as possible. If a CCP is in deviation, that could prompt a recall of your product, and that is not desirable. You want to be able to show that there's control of every single hazard. However, there are many ways to control hazards. So let's just walk through. This is not the order that I'm seeing in my Form 3, and that's intentional. But in your case, as you're doing your project, these should be in order. And you may have noted on my Form 3 that similar steps that are actually separate operations but are very similar have been grouped together with similar numbers. So mixing, for example, or not mixing, weighing, for example. There was a weighing dry and a weighing wet. In the real world, I may have different risk assessments for that, but from a project perspective, to get your project done, you may group things together that are similar. So going back to these hazards, I do need to list the hazards associated with each processing step. So let's go and take a look at the database and see what we can find for baking. Because again, I'm making banana muffins. Let's find a baking step for my muffins. Now, did have the question earlier, what's the difference between baking and cooking? You're well within your right to do a comparison. Earlier, I ran both together and clicked both together, and I found that the hazards were starting to overlap in very subtle ways. I highly recommend going one at a time. Let's click next, and that will list out our hazards relative to baking. Plant cross-contaminate. No, I want my associated hazards. There we go. Our associated hazards with baking are going to be biological, pathogen survival due to improper temperature distribution, time, and temperature application. So let's transfer that over to our form. Fortunately, this one is pretty straightforward. There's really only one hazard that's listed here. So now I didn't go through and identify cross-contamination points, but absolutely there are possible cross-contamination points that I should be cognizant of. I would anticipate those cross-contamination points are not specifically at the baking point, likely at other processing steps. Let's illustrate how the decision-making form is going to work here. So I listed my processes, I've listed my hazards. Now I need to ask, is this hazard low, medium, or high? So remembering, how do I assess hazards? I'm thinking about the frequency of the hazard occurring and the severity of the hazard when it impacts the population. So in my banana muffins, I had raw egg product and it was unpasteurized. So the likelihood of bacteria being in there is extremely high. And the likelihood of that bacteria causing illness that is reasonably severe is pretty good. Salmonella is going to cause a high level of gastric distress. It's unlikely it's going to kill people, but it is going to cause a high level of distress in the population, and the prevalence of it within the product is extremely high. So I am going to say it is a high risk. Does a GMP control this hazard? Now, as we mentioned in a previous video, I could be selecting for pasteurized ingredients. You can get flour that's been pasteurized. You can get eggs that have been pasteurized, except these are going to be extremely costly ingredients. And cooking is a pretty reliable step to be able to kill off these pathogens. And it's one where consistently we note in the industry, this is how this type of pathogen is controlled. Does a GMP control this hazard? I can brainstorm all I want, and I could argue yes, but in this case I'm going to say no, because I want to show you the power of the decision-making tree. Is it likely, so in column 4, is it likely contamination of the identified hazard could occur in excess of an acceptable level or could increase to an unacceptable level? So think about this. In certain cases, hazards may be present, but they may be at such a low level that it's not going to be causing a human health impact. So for example, in the case of rice, grains of rice, there is a known threshold for the presence of arsenic in rice. Arsenic, as you know, is a poisonous mineral that back in the day they applied it as a pesticide, and now it's been banned, but lead arsenate, lead as well, is found in rice residue. But in general, it is seen at a threshold that is acceptable to the consuming public and acceptable under government regulations. And arsenic's not going to increase over time. So you may be saying, no, it's not going to increase to an unacceptable level. Bacteria, however, can increase to an unacceptable level in food products. And so in the case of cooking to kill off bacteria, we are going to say, yes, it is going to carry on. If that hazard, like the arsenic in rice, is at a level that's acceptable under government regulations and is not going to increase, you could say no and carry on back to your next product here. Go back to the next hazard, or the next item in column 1. So back to column 5 here. Is the processing step listed in column 1 designed to eliminate the hazard to an acceptable level? So in the case of cooking, yes, it is. Now, if you think about where we're at here, you may find, oh, you know what? I've got to stop, and I'm going to carry on in a second video here. Goodbye.